Good evening. My name is Lindsay Schaefer, and I am doing my Module 2 presentation today. So this is actually my second take. Unfortunately, I was having connectivity issues with Loom because for some reason, even though my microphone was working, Loom was not picking up the sound. So I do apologize for the delay in that regard. But that aside, hopefully this makes up for it. And I definitely want to be able to talk a little bit more today about what actually are mediation and moderation analyses. So mediation and moderation is a model to understand in depth the relationship between your independent and dependent variables within the general linear model. So the biggest difference between the mediation and moderation models are their implications and how they apply to our model. So for instance, over here we have an example of moderation. So moderation occurs when the relationship between two variables, your independent variable and your dependent variable, depends on the third variable, m. We characterize m's influence on the relationship between A and B as an interaction effect, whereas a mediator mediates the relationship between the independent and dependent variables. So in this case, it would be M would be mediating relationship between A and B. And then mediation also essentially helps explain the reason why for such a relationship to exist. And these models are really important to us because I know that we previously talked about how the omission of important variables are deadly to our models. And so these are models that we could take into consideration when we're trying to think about analyzing relationships that are meaningful. So for today, I'm just going to present to you some made-up stories that I have regarding mediation and moderation analyses I ran for today. So in our first moderation model, we were interested in understanding how childhood stress and the severity of anhedonia symptoms are moderated by having the DISC-1 phenotype. To avoid potentially problematic high multicollinearity with the interaction term, the variables we have are centered. And just as a side note too, this is applied for the rest of our models, at least in moderation. So to test whether the DISC-1 phenotype moderates the relationship between childhood stress and anhedonia, we found statistical significance with our main and interaction effects in our model, as we can see here with our p-values. Upon examining the interaction plot showed an enhanced effect that childhood stress increased along with DISC-1 phenotyping. And we also see, with childhood stress increasing as well. We can also see that those who test positive for the DISC-1 phenotype had improved rates of anhedonia. However, they were more sensitive to changes influenced by childhood stress, as you can see by the slope. We ran some diagnostics, and our residual plots of our coefficient estimates and predictions don't appear biased, and our data look relatively normally distributed. So in my book, everything looks pretty blue to me. In our second moderation model, we are interested in understanding how childhood stress and severity of anhedonia symptoms are moderated by sex. As we can see, severity of anhedonia was not a significant outcome, nor was childhood stress as a significant predictor. However, we do see that sex was determined to be a standalone significant variable, and we do see that when sex does interact with childhood stress, that the two have a statistically significant influence over in terms of what we're seeing here. And then you can also see that although there is a significant main effect for the moderator, there are also differences in intercepts and the slopes of our line, as we see here. And then although our data appear normally distributed, we do see that several points have high residuals just based on how they're clustered over here. And then finally, in our third moderation model, we were interested in understanding how childhood stress and severity of anhedonia symptoms are moderated by whether or not a subject is currently enrolled in therapy. So therapy status by itself was considered a significant variable, but the relationship between childhood stress and therapy, but the relationship between childhood stress and levels of anhedonia didn't seem to be influenced by whether or not someone was in therapy, which we can indicate here. And then our residual plots again appear, our coefficient estimates and predictions appear normally distributed. Switching gears, we wanted to see whether exercise mediates the combination of fluoxetine use and depression symptoms. So I followed Barron and Kenny's advice on how to conduct my mediation analysis. So that goes in a series of 4 steps. So our first step is we analyze the total effect of our model, which we indicate here. So we found that fluoxetine had an effect on depression symptoms. And this is important to do this step because we wanted to see that the causal variable is correlated with the outcome. Second, we wanted to then see whether or not our causal variable is correlated with the mediator, which in this case is exercise. And we do see that fluoxetine use is significantly correlated with exercise. Third, in our third step, we wanted to show that the mediator affects the outcome variable, with our outcome being depression symptoms. In this case, we do see that exercise does significantly influence our variable of depression symptoms. And then finally, for step 4, to establish that exercise completely mediates the fluoxetine depression symptoms relationship, the effect of fluoxetine on depression symptoms controlling for exercise should be 0. So given the data, we fail to rule out mediation in our model. So as you can see here, we do have complete mediation occurring. One way to really investigate the effects or the indirect effects of a mediation model in particular is bootstrapping. So bootstrapping is a popular method in addition to the Sobel test. And what you can do with bootstrapping is that you can take as many samples of a specified size with replacement from the original samples, and you would repeat this process at least 1,000 times. So just rules of thumb with the bootstrapping is that it does not assume normality. And again, it does indicate which direct and indirect effects are significant. So as you can see in this table, although our direct effect is not significant, we do see a significant indirect effect in our model. And then last but not least, I ran another mediation analysis model where instead of looking at depression symptoms and fluoxetine, I wanted to look at how the relationship with olanzapine and hallucinations. So again, I followed Barron and Kenny's advice on how to conduct my mediation analysis for this case. So we first analyzed the total effect of our model and found that olanzapine had an effect on hallucinations, establishing that our causal variable is correlated with the outcome. Second, we then wanted to see whether or not olanzapine was correlated with our mediator, which is exercise. And we did see that olanzapine use significantly correlated with exercise. Third, and again, we wanted to see how our mediator exercise affects the outcome of hallucinations. In this case, exercise alone did not influence our variable of hallucination symptoms. And since we were unable to fulfill step 3, given the data, we can rule out any mediation occurring since partial mediation itself requires at least steps 1 through 3 fulfilled, as per Barron and Kenny's advice. So with that said, this is it for my Module 2 presentation on mediation and moderation analyses. Thank you all so much for watching and reviewing, and I look forward to your feedback regarding my performance with this module. Thank you.